I've completely lost where we even were. Okay.
All right, let's do it.
Greetings and welcome to a D3 Datacast here. Matt, we're going to do our best QCast impression, a little bit of a different format than what we're used to. We're pleased to have in the D3 Datacast big box, Bill Sall, head men's basketball coach at Calvin University. Thanks for joining us, Bill Sall.
Gentlemen, how are we doing tonight?
Very, very
We're
well.
doing great. It looks like we're all wearing the same sweatshirt too. So that's we color
Absolutely.
coordinated.
A little bit different. All got the same color. All right, so by way of just a quick introduction, Bill, you are not only the head coach, but you were a standout player at Calvin from 85 to 1990, two-time MIAA co-MVP, so they made you share that twice, unfortunately. You're third on Calvin's all-time scoring list and one of only 3 2,000-point scorers in school history. You ended your playing career and got into coaching, you were an assistant at Calvin, Ferris State, and Hillsdale, before getting a head coaching job, 11 years at Ferris State, 6 years at Northern Michigan, and now of our Calvin University. Hopefully I got all that right.
You
But
did really good. That's
okay,
great research.
great. So with stops kind of all over the state, we got Grand Rapids, we've got Big Rapids, we've got Marquette, Michigan. Bill, I think for our Michigan-based viewers, you're uniquely qualified here to answer one of the big questions, and that is, where does up north actually start?
Great question. I'm going to say, from my experience, we're talking right across the line of Traverse City, and then you're officially up north.
Oh, okay.
So,
All
so
right.
now if you and that's if you kind of take it across, you're getting into about Gaylord area. So I always go with how the snow is flying. So on the long trips from northern Michigan up and down, you always hit like the main causeway of 75 by Gaylord, and it almost always was a blizzard. So I'm giving you, then you get into real snow from Gaylord up to Marquette. So that's up north.
And you get a lot of snow up in Marquette. So we can't complain here in Grand Rapids about what we're dealing with.
Listen, don't complain at all. The last year I was there in Marquette, we had 230 inches of snow in a year. So
Wow.
that's about 3 Grand Rapids winters put together.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, we're the offspring of a couple Michigan Tech graduates, so they steered us clear of that. They said that was not something we wanted to get into.
Right.
So, Coach, Zach read off kind of your background coaching and playing at the Division III and Division II level. I'm sure you've seen the game evolve greatly since you were a player and how you've coached it. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe the game is coached differently these days versus when you got into coaching or when you were a player?
I think you've seen a big evolution, and I think some things stay the same and a lot of things change. Certainly, the strength and athleticism of the players is vastly different than when I played. I mean, I was kind of a skinny 200-pound kid that played power forward at 6'5". I wouldn't really, I never would say this to our guys, but I don't know how I would match up against those guys now if Owen or Jalen might be guarding me. And I think the one thing that's really been interesting in my career is, how much, kind of your strategy has changed immensely, right? So like when I was first coaching, you had a 1, you had a 2, you had a 3, you had a 4, you had a 5 in their positions, and they were very defined roles. And that's really how you played. And now you look at it, especially like at a Calvin, we almost play positionless basketball, still a post player, but everybody has to do a lot of things. And so I think you've noticed the players themselves become more skilled overall, really, in this last 20 years. And I think that's really filtered down to Division III as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about the transition. You've spent prior to Calvin your head coaching career at the Division II level. Now coming back to Division III, what's that transition been like as a coach? And how do you see like the similarities and differences between Division II and Division III?
Here's the thing, Division I, Division II, Division III, you all have great teams. There's really good programs, really good coaches. I think a couple of things of going to Division III as compared to Division II that I've really enjoyed. When you're in a situation where you're giving out a scholarship, and interacting with that player, there's still that relationship, but there's still a lot of it that's almost contractual. It's like, hey, I gave you a full, so here's my expectations. And a lot of the phraseology that players will use of, it's time to go to work, it's time to grind. And I think there's still that enjoyment of basketball, and certainly I had a number of guys that love the game. But the one thing that's interesting when you get to Division III, I mean, look, we're giving them not one red cent to play basketball here. They're doing it because they love the game. They absolutely love being around their teammates, and they have really a strong affinity and love for the school that they're at. And me being here at Calvin, that just rings so true. And so I think, that impactful part of the locker room and, what you can really get out of a player, because again, there's no requirements of what he has to do. Now, trust me, when we practice just as hard as any Division I, II, or III program out there, and our guys compete at exactly the same level. But I think overall, you just see a general love for teammates and a love for the game a little more maybe than what I've seen at the scholarship level.
Now, speaking of transitions, your transition and taking over the Calvin program was made maybe a little bit more interesting than how you figured it might go with COVID, right? You were able to complete what I think is probably a normal first year, but I think it's probably big for a coach taking over a program to get that year 2, right? You were kind of expecting all right, I got my program set up a little bit. Year 2 is going to be big. Year 2 for you was the COVID year. Now you guys were able to practice and play a few games. But I have to imagine that kind of threw a wrench in your plans. And then, year 3, kind of that specter of COVID was still hanging over the season. Was last year like the first normal feeling year that you've had now finally kind of being beyond COVID and being a little bit, more settled into the role at Calvin?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the first year, absolutely, it was awesome to be back. I don't think I will ever forget, the first actual coaching of the Hope Calvin game, right? I mean, after playing in it, which was awesome, and then, quite frankly, spending 25 years watching it on TV or watching it on your computer screen, and then actually getting that opportunity to coach in that game, that was really unique and awesome. And then, yeah, the COVID thing hits, and that year was really tough. We had a lot of stops and starts. I think 3 consecutive times we would start playing, and then suddenly someone would get COVID and we would shut it down. So there was just a ton of frustrations with that. I think to the benefit, that following year after the COVID year, we were able to get some grad transfers because of that, right? Luke Morrison, who had an amazing year. Alec Froon, who came from Northern Michigan. Both those guys came in as grad transfers. And then you saw Emmett Warners and Thad Szymanski actually be able to then take advantage of that and come back and take that grad year. And I think a lot of that was due to COVID. I mean, if that doesn't happen, I don't necessarily know if you would see those guys make that switch, but it was just such an unfulfilling year in some ways. It was just great to get them back. But, I think the one thing that we struggled with probably more than anything else is just getting the fans back. That year, we didn't have the greatest of attendance. And so it was just nice to set the tone this year where, our increase in fan attendance was almost 600 per game. Wow. So really cool to see it kind of go full circle. And now I think really back into a situation where, hey, we're back to Calvin hoops and seeing really good crowds and really great enthusiasm.
Yeah, you mentioned a couple of students 2 years ago you had as grad students, grad transfers. That 5th year is continuing to be an option, I think, for a couple more years. How do you see that continuing to affect the landscape, 5th year eligibility, transfer type things, either for good or for bad? It's just kind of the reality we're in right now.
I think it's just something you're in. I mean, you can kind of look at it from a ton of different perspectives, right? This will be the last year. So Uchenna and Marcus Bolt were freshmen in the COVID year. So now they're full circle back into it, right? And I think when you really look at it overall, a lot of those guys not having that college experience, I think at every level, man, to actually be able to get that extra year is huge. And then on the other part of it is, at the Division I and II level, a lot of kids are coming back and taking advantage of that 5th year. And I think it's really opened the recruiting window to a lot of kids that necessarily maybe a couple years ago we might not have had a chance because they would have had more opportunities at the Division 1 and 2 level. And, we're able to get those kids on campus, at least talk to them. So I see the positives, but again, I think it's run its course. Certainly, this will be the end of it. And it will be time to move on to just the normal, hey, let's have 4 years to play college basketball and see what you can do.
Right. This year, we've had some new rules for the NCAA. You're allowed to pull 8 days of practice up earlier. I think you guys have been able to take a little bit of advantage of that. Kind of talk about that change, what it's meant for you and the team, and how you expect it to carry into the normal practice season here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, great question. I think it's been huge. And first of all, man, I'm glad the NCAA is allowing us to do this. It's interesting because I think sometimes at the Division III level, it's like we really try to do a great job of, hey, the academics are number one, and being a student athlete, we're with a capital S. I think sometimes people don't realize that our guys are in the gym every day, no matter what, right? And so those 2 hours that they're in there, to make them a little more constructive. And I think the great thing for me is, number one, the interaction that you get with your team earlier on, and then the ability to really develop some ideas and just the beginning concepts of what we want to see things look like this year. And then not having to smash it all into 14 days until they play basketball, right? I mean, so you're getting a group, if it's the normal like it has been, on the 15th, they're not in shape. You're basically spending a week trying to get them into shape. You're spending a whole lot of time trying to stuff a whole bunch of stuff down the throat. Like it's like almost like the fire hydrant, just boo, basketball. And this way, we're coming in with a really solid base, beneficial that we have a lot of guys returning this year, which helps us, but we have some new guys, and, they're able to kind of grasp it. And then again, it's kind of nice to do, hey, we did Tuesday, Thursday. So on a Tuesday, you come in, go through the practice routine, but then you get a day off to kind of recuperate a little bit, then back on a Thursday. So I've loved this time. I think it's been really constructive for us. And I think you're going to see, even from a Division III level across the board, quite a few more teams really prepared to play, right? I mean, it's like we've gone into the season where, there'd be 4 or 5 practices and we'd play like a fair state and an exhibition. Well, there's no way you're going to be able to really be ready to compete. And even at the 11th of November, when I played, which is crazy, we didn't really start playing games until the weekend before Thanksgiving. So practice was forever, which I did not like at all. But it's much nicer now where, games start a little earlier, but wow, to get these practices, and I think you're going to see a better product on the floor.
Your roster dynamics going to be a little bit different this year. Of course, we've made some reference here. 2 years ago, you might have had the most experienced or oldest team in Division III. Go to last year, you might have had the least experienced team in Division III. So this year, you get to bring back a lot of those guys who, now have a year under their belt. With that being the case, bringing so much back, is there a little bit of a pickup where you left off last season, or there's some things kind of in this, preseason area where, you've got to go through no matter what the roster looks like, or is it kind of a combination of both given the makeup of this year's team?
It's a combination of both. I mean, the great thing now, and to steal from Tom Izzo, I do that a lot, but you're far better off being a player coach team than a coach team. And last year we had to be a coach team because, quite frankly, nobody knew what they were doing, right? So it was always me or the staff really dictating everything. And now it's just refreshing to see where, even though some of these guys are freshmen and only sophomores, the game minutes that they've logged sometimes is what you could see out of a junior. So, we've been able to really have those guys coach up our new guys and have the ability to have some of the, we have a few transfers in to get the lingo, to get the understanding. It just makes a world of difference when you have peers coaching peers. And so, I think we're doing a few different things. I mean, it's like last year, for instance, we knew eventually Jalen Overway was going to get doubled, but we really didn't work on it nearly enough. And trust me, I mean, the first practice when we did some offensive concepts, that was a big thing, is, okay, how are we going to be able, as doubles happen, to be able to circumvent that and make sure that we're still adequate on the offensive side? So some learning lessons from there. And then, we're trying to, as always, do some new things offensively. We really simplified the playbook last year because we had to. So it's kind of nice to be able to delve in a little bit and get past page 10 and really start talking about some new things that we should be able to do.
Coach, from my perspective, last year, your team's identity was a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball than the offensive side of the ball. Is that kind of your coaching mindset, defense first, or is that just kind of the team you had last year and that's the way you were going to win? What's kind of your philosophy when it comes to offense and defense?
Well, listen, defense wins you championships. That's just the facts, right? And I think you would ask any player in our roster right now, if you don't have a willingness to defend and basically a certain fire in the belly to go out there and compete at a really high level on defensive end, it's going to be really hard for you to play for us. So I mean that's a huge part of it, right? I mean, and if you can't defend, you're never going to be able to be in a situation where you're playing championship level basketball. But I love offense, right? I mean, that's the fun thing for me is, to get out the napkin and start drawing up a few plays and talking to a few guys. And, it's interesting, you're on Twitter in the summer and all kinds of different plays that you see and say, hey, this might work for us. So that's the tinkering part. That's fun, right? I would say overall, my mind, I haven't changed much on the defensive side of the things that I know that need to be successful, but I'm always tinkering with, hey, what can we do on the offensive side to make this a little more intriguing, a little more difficult to guard? But I would say if you see a practice, almost every one of them, it's about half and half, right? I mean, about if we're going for 2 hours, an hour is going to be strictly on D, and even when we're running offense, we still are always in a transition defensive situation.
Sure. Yeah. Just looking at some of the roster transition we have this year, you really had one senior, I think, that played a whole bunch, Eli Sensenig. He's gone to graduation. Other than that, a lot of your players had the opportunity to return this year. To me, it looks like you're going to have a lot of depth of experience, which is different than last year. Can you talk a little bit about that depth that you have on the roster? What are the positives and negatives that brings to you as a coach of having this many guys with this much experience and quite frankly, I think a lot of talent as well?
Absolutely. And that's going to be the challenge, not only as a staff, but then also kind of as the players themselves, right? I mean, right now I would say we have 13 guys that can play. We have, in my mind, a really nice complement of guys that are returning, including 4 out of the 5 starters from last year's team and really 7 of the top 8. And then, we added, I think, a couple of freshmen that have an opportunity. Jordan Scott in particular, I think, has a chance to be a pretty good player, but again, as a freshman, that's going to be a challenge. But then, we brought in 2 transfers. Trip Bremersma played at Saginaw Valley. He's from the Zeeland area. And then Vince Overway, who's Jalen Overway's older brother. So when you start to put all that mix and match together, I mean, there's 13 guys I truly believe that could play for us. I have never played more than 9 and 10 at the most, right? Because again, I just don't think if you're playing 3 minutes a half and it's 6 minutes total in a game, it makes it really difficult for you to really get the feel for things and be able to play at the level you have to play at. So on the positive side, the competition at practice has been really, really good, right? Because it's not like our guys don't know that. We've talked about it a ton with them. But on the other side of things, you're going to have some really good players that might not get as much of an opportunity to actually play in the games. So, we have to do a great job of communicating. We have to get everybody to have buy-in of the roles. And to me, that's a big thing as far as where we're going to go with this team, right? Is how do we navigate those roads and also how do we, from a positive standpoint, everybody really accept what they have for roles. So fun, but that's every year. Every year has its challenges, right? I mean, I always give Derek DeVries a lot of grief because, in his first year, we didn't have 5 guys. Well, I should say that's not fair. We didn't have many guys that could play. So those guys, I think, logged an average of about 36 or 37 minutes a game, which is way too much, especially for Derek. But, we managed. We managed with it. But it's much better to have depth, trust me.
So you referenced kind of the modern game and the positionless basketball, right? So sometimes in this era, you talk about like an old school traditional big man, and that's sort of like a negative, right? But you have one in Jalen Overway, and that is definitely not a negative, right? It's he's got kind of the old school back to the basket, low post game in like all the right ways. So I guess what's it like having a player like that as a coach? Are you having to go back to like some old school bag of tricks? That maybe you thought you wouldn't be revisiting, but you have a talent like him, and it works in this new era. And then also getting other guys used to playing with that, right? Like I'm sure they're not making a lot of post entry passes, in AAU ball or their high school teams. So I'm sure it's an adjustment for everyone. What's that process like to be able to utilize it like an old school big like that?
Yeah, that's interesting, Zach. I think last year we had to spend about 3 weeks just teaching guys how to throw the ball to the post, and we were actually miserable at it for a long portion of the year. I can't tell you how many times I don't have much hair left like yourself, and I pulled a lot of it out with just the most bizarre passes to the post you would ever see in your life. But you're right. I mean, you could play your entire high school and AAU season and never once even look to pass to some with the back to the basket. And the game has evolved in some ways good, in some ways not, right? I mean, you look at how many teams, college teams now almost play a pro style offense, right? Where it's high ball screen, a lot of guys standing, that guy makes a play and then give it to the next guy and let him make a play. So, and you're right. I had to go back into like the stuff when I had Justin Keenan at Ferris. So this is like 2009. Some of the things we did with that to be able to really get back to post basketball. But this year, in this summer, what I studied a lot is UConn, because their big guy was just huge in the tournament, and they did some really unique things, especially of getting that double that you would love to see from the weak side, just not have that guy there. So more of an overload and then trying to find your post guy there. So there's still a few guys that do it, a few teams that are really successful at, but you got to look at the Purdue's and the UConns as far as really finding teams that really love to just pound the ball inside. And look, I'm not dumb. I mean, I like guys that can score 25 points in a game and shoot 60%. That's beneficial. But then for Jalen too, we've encouraged him this summer to really diversify a little bit too. You will see him a little more on the perimeter because he's a good shooter. I'm hoping that we still are going to get him to his bread and butter. But man, we want to be able to get him exposed in a bunch of different areas for sure. Especially as many people that just hack him every possession he gets.
Right.
It gets tiring after a while.
Another player I love to watch, and he got some defensive accolades, Uchenna Egekeze. You could tell right from his freshman year, he was a special defensive player. I don't think I've seen a freshman defend like he did when I was watching on my live stream that COVID year. And then he's also added something to his offensive game, I think, every single year. Talk about how special of a player he is and what he adds to your team, the dimension that he adds.
Yeah, you're spot on, Matt, with the additions of offense. The first year he was an amazing defender, but he could not throw it in the ocean when it came to actually trying to make a shot. But every year he's come back with another little different of a skill set, and he works incredibly hard over the course of the summer. The one thing for him is he's just an absolute joy to coach. I don't think I've ever had a kid in my 30 years of coaching now that plays as hard as he does every possession. And he does the same thing in practice. I mean, it's like the standard bearer for our team. I mean, if you're going to come in, hey, you want to know what playing hard means is look at Uchenna and see what he does in every possession. Just a great kid to coach. The one thing I've really enjoyed with him is how, the first year, I don't think he might have said more than 2 words to me for an entire year. I had to just beg him to even talk a little bit. And he's really done a great job of coming out of his shell. We really encouraged him on the leadership aspect of it. And it's just really neat to see him this year really becoming more vocal. We just had a practice yesterday and things weren't really going well for his squad. And he actually pulled everybody aside and kind of did his own huddle, which if you would have told me Uchenna would have done that 4 years ago, I'd say you're crazy. It just never would have happened. So it's really great to see his growth, not only as a player, but overall as a person.
So he's definitely one of the the veteran leaders. But last year it was really impact freshmen up and down your rotation as you guys made that transition between it from an old team to a young team. So I think a lot of Calvin fans probably expect to see a lot of the same in the new season, just with another year of experience for everyone. But maybe is there a name or something that fans should look for that might be different from last season? Any expectations you have of like newcomers or a wrinkle that we might not see coming if we're just expecting to see kind of more of the same from a year ago with so many people coming back?
Yeah, there's a lot of people back, but I think we had a lot of guys I think that had really really good summers, and I'm really interested, and I think that's the one thing right now. I really have a hard time, and it always starts this way, right? I mean, you just mentioned two guys. Any lineup I come up with, any starting lineup I come up with, any top 8, you got Uchenna, you got Jalen. All right, I mean that's those are the standard bearers. But there's a lot of guys. I think Owen Vernando had a really really good summer. I think Marcus Bolt has really put on some good weight and looks to really be excel. The one kid I think that didn't play much last year that's coming back. There's two guys. Trevin Winkle really, really had a great summer, and he's looked really good in the beginning of practices here. And Brady Ewing, who redshirted last year, I think he has a chance to help us out a little bit. And then some of the standards, Luca Ressler, Matt Ambrose, Logan Vanessa, and I think all those guys really have done some good things. And again, I think they will help us, and they're all kind of competing for one spot. With the transfers, I've liked what I've seen out of Trupp Riemersma. But again, he's coming in a completely different system than what he was running at Saginaw Valley. So his learning curve right now is big, but I think as he adjusts to how we want to do things, I think he just another 6'4" athlete that can really move and cut and really defend.
Yeah, I almost forget about Brady Ewing sometimes because he was on the roster last year, and I think in a walking boot for the entire season.
Yeah.
So he didn't play. So getting a chance to see another guy who was a freshman last year potentially get into that rotation would be interesting as well.
Absolutely. And I have to pause myself with Brady every once in a while because he practiced a whopping 5 practices before he broke his foot very seriously, and again he was in a walking boot almost the whole year. Now, the great thing is he put on about 25 pounds. So, now he's about 6'8", and I think he's at about 225, which is awesome. But, again, he's just taking baby steps. Yeah. But you also have to remember he's now a redshirt freshman. He's still got 4 years left in his time here at Calvin. So I'm really excited to see where he goes.
Yeah. Coming into the season last year, I think no one knew what to make of you guys because we talked about how young you were. I think this year's going to be a little different. You're the defending MIAA champions. I don't think anyone in the conference is going to sleep on you guys. There's going to be a preseason top 25 poll probably later this month. I expect to see you guys in that top 25 and probably in the top half of that top 25. Do you and the team, do you talk about external expectations, preseason expectations, or is it just goals for yourself and expectations that you have as a team? Kind of what infiltrates the team there from the outside?
Well, I mean, it's tough, right? And this is what's kind of cool now with D3, right? Is like I got every one of my guys on every one of your Twitter pages, right? I try to keep them off of a few of them every once in a while. It's like, let's not try to get too much into the hype, but that's what also makes it really cool, right? It's great to have guys at a small college setting, have the ability to actually, be recognized. I mean, I just think that's what's so cool about D3, right? When you compare it, like D2, nobody knows what's going on with D2. The GLIAC, maybe the town knows. In Marquette, I don't know if they ever knew because they were too consumed with Division I hockey. But, you come here and, our guys, yeah, they're reading all the stuff, which I don't mind, right? I mean, it's like, it's nice to have that recognition, but it's also, like last year, after 10 practices, I'm not kidding. I remember we're in the car with Derek and we're going to get some lunch. And I said, I don't know if we can win 10 games. I mean, it was a bad practice, right? But it was also like, we just were so young, and it was great to see those guys really make some huge improvements over the year. But it's a very different story when you are, like the old Dan Campbell, when you're out hunting and then now you're hunted. I love the thing of, well, you won't have to look far for us because we're going to be on your front porch. And that's kind of our attitude, right? I mean, I would much rather be picked first and be ranked and say, okay, here's our expectations, gentlemen. How are we going to go about every day in practice? How are we going to go about what we do outside of practice to make sure that every time, that the team is going to give us our best shot, right? And then how do you work with that? And I think it's really unique at Calvin because you see that in lots of our programs where, yeah, they are used to being in that ranked stage and used to having people come for them. So it's really great to talk to some of the coaches about how to handle that as well.
Yeah. Looking ahead to your schedule this year, I think you guys are scheduling tough. Just hitting the highlights, some of the non-conference games here. I'll read a little list. Playing Marietta at the Great Lakes Invitational. You're playing UW La Crosse. You're playing Wheaton again. You're playing St. Norbert, who was in the tournament last year. You're playing Barry, who could have been in the tournament last year. You're playing University of Wisconsin-Platteville. Those are all good programs. They've been in and around the regional rankings the last couple of years. I think scheduling's a big deal in Division III. What's the importance for you as a coach of setting a good schedule, and what's the difficulty then of setting that schedule and then executing against that schedule?
Well, I took my page out of Matt Snyder's book on how to schedule properly. Look, here's the thing for me. And trust me, I know I could put together a schedule where we could go 10-1 in the non-conference, right? And have it do us absolutely no good. But you also understand as a coach that there's a little bit of fear of you. I look at that thing and go, oh my goodness. I mean, we're going to play a ton of teams that are going to be ranked in the region, good basketball teams. And, even in the GLI, I mean, we're playing Marietta, but La Roche, I think, has a chance to be very, very good. Yeah. So, that's daunting, but it's also, I mean, I think for us, we're trying to do our best to make the MIAA not a one bid conference every year, right? And it was fortunate 2 years ago that we got a couple of good wins and we were able to get it, but that's the only time we've been a two bid conference. And I don't know the last time.
Long time.
So, I guess, I mean, I've coached enough games and I guess I've won enough that, if it does so happen that we battle off and we end up 6-5, well, that's not great, but I'd much rather have it that with the strength of schedule than be counting on wins. And I think our guys want that, right? I mean, you talk to them about the schedule, they're excited about it. And then, man, I'd have to talk to you sometime off the record about what I did next year because it's absolutely just dumb. But anyway,
we'll go
through this year.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, like you mentioned wanting the league to get multiple bids. You're playing Barry and Platteville at Shrine. Is that you and Brooks coming together to try to work together to make sure you're both getting good non-conference games?
Me and Brooks have talked about this a ton, right? Of like, okay, how can we amp up our schedule to make it more competitive? When we start talking about doing something down there, and of course for winter break we wanted to go to Angola, Indiana, because it is such a beautiful spot in January to go play basketball. It's kind of comparison. We went down to San Antonio, Texas, and Florida, but
sure.
But it was just too good a competition to pass up, right? And like I said, I think overall right now, until and the hope is, in the MIAA, we get back to a little bit of what it used to be here, where you have a lot of really competitive teams. We just have to beef it up. And I thought, my goodness, we're going to play against, quite frankly, I think two teams that are going to be regionally ranked in their regions. So, hey, let's go for it and see what happens.
Yeah.
Well, we're looking forward to a season full of really great and interesting games in Division III basketball, and certainly Calvin will be in the mix in a number of those. Just a lot of excitement from our end. I'm sure from your end as well for the season coming up. Just as we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to say to Calvin fans who might be listening, or just general Division III basketball fans out there?
I think from the Calvin fan standpoint, and I say this in every recruit that comes through, we just went through September where I think we had 27 guys on campus. and the truth is, there are no better fans in the world than what you get out of Calvin fans, because they have extreme amount of passion and love for Calvin. And it's amazing to me how much they just have an intense love for the team and what they bring to the table. So, that support is amazing. And again, my hope is that we continue to see that grow. Last year we grew by 600 fans. So let's see if we can keep that going.
Yeah.
And then I think, just on the end of it, it's like this Division III community is so special. And, it's all the way across. I mean, it's like some of the personalities that you meet, some of that you have here on your D3 Datacast, but across the board, it's just so cool to be a part of. And very appreciative for what you guys do, but really appreciative of that whole D3 community and the passionate fans that are out there for their prospective schools.
Well, we appreciate you joining us. We felt like if it ever came that you had made an appearance on Bob Quillman's QCast before you were on our show, that we would never live that down. I think Bob would remind us of that all the time. So now officially we've got you here as an official D3 Datacast guest. So you're free to go on Bob's show without any reservation or guilt that maybe you were not doing us a solid. So we're grateful to have some of your time, and hey, we're looking forward to seeing you on the sideline in action with our Knights back on the court.
Awesome. And just to let you guys know, I would never go on Bob's podcast before not going on this one. I mean, that would be sacrilegious.
Great to hear.
Especially since you guys do such a better job than he does. But that's
whoa.
All right. Well, hey, great to see you guys.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.
In addition to our thanks to Bill Sall for joining us for this episode, we also need to give a special thank you to those who support us on Patreon. Head to patreon.com/D3Datacast for more information, how you can support our show, support the all-new D3Datacast.com, all the data, all the information you can find there, ad-free, no paywalls, all thanks to the great support of the people listed here.
Good job, team.